everyone, and welcome back to another new reaction series we are starting on this channel. First off, I would like to apologize for my absence. Been busy with work and life in general, but we're back for now at least, and I will get this series done. Yeah, today we are watching a series about Emperor Basil II, Eastern Roman Emperor. Of the late 10th and early 11th centuries, consistently ranked as one of the greatest Roman emperors of all time, and I agree with that sentiment. And this is a series from HistoryMarche. It's 7 parts, and as always I will try to add some context along the way that might not be included, and hopefully we can all learn something from these videos. So without further ado, let's get going. So looking at this map, let's set the stage of it for why things look the way they do on the map. We have the Eastern Roman Empire, much reduced now from its glory days under Justinian the Great. And how has Rome found itself in this situation? Well, in the aftermath of Justinian's conquests, things started to go bad pretty quickly. His immediate successors proved to be quite incapable to do the job as a Roman emperor. And then we have the calamitous apocalyptic event known as the Muslim conquests, where the empire was permanently crippled by its deprivation of the very important and rich provinces of Egypt, Syria, and Palestine. And the empire would never regain any of these provinces, well, except for maybe Syria. And that was a huge blow to the empire. And then we have the constant migratory waves, across the Danube by various Slavic peoples, primarily Bulgarians. And that meant that the Bulgarians gradually expanded over the course of several centuries. And now we have arrived in the mid-10th century, and we can see the state we're at. Bulgaria has expanded and has become an empire, in essence, taking over all of the European possessions of the Eastern Roman Empire. And this long decline is sometimes known as the Byzantine Dark Ages. And one would have to agree, it was really a tough time for the Romans. And yeah, that is the stage we find ourselves at the beginning of Basil's reign.
The mid-900s saw a period of remarkably peaceful relations between the two major powers of the Balkan Peninsula.
Yeah, the Romans have been at war with the Bulgarians for a very long time now. It's several centuries at this point. So what has happened? Well, basically the Romans tried to fight the Bulgarians, bribe them, make them turn away. None of that worked. When they challenged them on the battlefield, the Romans usually lost, and whenever they did win, it didn't really change the grand strategic picture, really. And it's mostly thanks to the efforts of, well, mostly might be an exaggeration, but much of the state that Bulgaria finds itself in the early 10th century is due to a great ruler they had, Simeon the Great, he is known as. And it's a well-deserved title, the Great. And, well, the Bulgarian Empire reached its peak under his reign. Several things happened. He was able to make Bulgaria into a true empire because he was legitimized both by the papacy and the Eastern Roman emperors. He was granted the title of Caesar. In the Slavic tradition, it's the term Tsar, which would continue to be used by monarchies of Slavic nature. So the primary example, of course, would be Russia. And the Bulgarian Orthodox Church became its own patriarchate, and it's only the sixth one after Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and so on. And Bulgaria experienced a cultural golden age under Simeon the Great. Now at this point, at the beginning of this video, Simeon has just died, but he did have quite grand ambitions. He was actually going to conquer Constantinople and proclaim a new Romano-Bulgarian successor state, if you can imagine that. And he did not succeed, obviously, but not for lack of trying. He tried to basically bring over the Pecheneg tribes in the north to his side, and the Fatimid Caliph. He actually requested naval support in order to take Constantinople from the Fatimids. But in both those cases, the Romans managed to use their vast wealth to basically just bribe them. And so Simeon's greatest ambition was never fulfilled. Nonetheless, he left behind quite a legacy, and that is where we find ourselves at the beginning of this video.
The Byzantine Empire and the traditionally hostile Bulgarian Empire. This stood in stark contrast to the beginning of the 10th century, as a war raged between Bulgaria and Eastern Rome that spanned over a decade and saw the former dominate the latter.
Yeah, I was discussing previously how the Romans haven't fared all that well against the Bulgarians, and it was in several steps. First, they were forced to recognize Bulgaria as an independent state. Then they were allowed to establish their own Bulgarian Orthodox Church. And then, of course, there was the usual extraction of annual tributes that were to be paid to the rulers of Bulgaria. And this humiliation has continued for a very long time now. And Bulgaria has pretty much reached its zenith at this point, and Rome couldn't find itself in a more terrible position.
In the aftermath of this clash, the Bulgarian Empire enjoyed the status of undisputed master of southeastern Europe.
Oh yeah, and make no mistake about it, the Bulgarian Empire at this point is one of the strongest states in Europe, actually. And it was a very impressive feat to be able to challenge the Romans for supremacy like this. But if you know anything about the Romans, is that they are very stubborn and they won't quit until they get what they want.
Yet as the century progressed, the balance of power gradually began to shift back towards Byzantium. The Eastern Roman Empire, essentially reduced to its Asian provinces, was still a significant power in the Mediterranean world. With that in mind, the successors of Augustus and Constantine were fixated on reclaiming the lost imperial lands. Such a revival, however, would be no mean feat, with several serious obstacles standing between the Byzantines and their former glory. But then, a certain young boy by the name of Basil II was crowned emperor. I guess you're here because you want to learn about history, but I'd like to share with you how educational video really isn't a every step if you 100 on. In 963, Emperor Romanus II passed away.
Alright, video begins off with Romanus II now. He's an interesting ruler. He succeeded his father, Constantine VII, to the throne, and such a safe, undisrupted imperial succession was quite unheard of at this point. You know the Romans, they like to rebel, assassinate, all that, and there will be plenty of that. But still, Romanus II manages to succeed his father to the throne at age 21. His reign is quite brief. He succeeded his father in 959, and he was known to be a pleasure-loving ruler, let's just say that. So he didn't actually do much governing himself. However, he appointed capable people to run the state for him. In terms of administrative affairs, he left much to his chief advisor, and Joseph Bringas, the eunuch. He was a eunuch. Many of these prime ministers, basically, of the Eastern Roman Empire at this point are eunuchs, because they cannot pose a dynastic threat to the emperor. They were often entrusted with a lot of responsibility. And then you also had the low-born but very cunning Empress Theophano. And on the military side, Romanus II was also blessed. He relied much on the brothers of the illustrious Phocas family. We'll get back to those. And especially the two brothers Nikephoros and Leo Phocas. And they would prove to be very capable military generals. And we'll hear more about Nikephoros especially. Anyways, after a lengthy hunting expedition, it is said that Romanus II just died. He had exerted himself too much, apparently. There are rumors that Theophano, the empress, actually poisoned Romanus, but it's kind of hard to see what sort of benefit that would bring to Theophano, especially because her children and future emperors were way underage. They were not even 5 yet, so it's hard to see what benefit. It would be quite a risky move if that was the case, because her position as Augusta was safe. But it's not going to be that after Romanus dies.
At age 26, leaving his two sons, both under the age of 5, as his only successors. These young boys, the future emperors Basil II and his brother Constantine VIII, were crowned just before the death of their father, but were too young to rule. Their mother, Theophano, a low-born but brilliant and shrewd woman, was intent on securing the unstable position of her family. As one may expect, this was no easy task. Ambitious members of the Anatolian aristocracy were waiting for an opportune moment to usurp the throne.
And if you know anything about Rome and the Roman Empire, you know this is a very common thing. And especially so in this case, because many of these people are interrelated by various family ties, so they do have legitimate claims to the throne in more or less. It's not like the crisis of the 3rd century where military generals were just usurping left and right just because they felt like it or were even pressured into it. In this case, there is actually a family lineage and ties that gives them some legitimacy.
Eunuchs and other conspiring court members sought to pull the strings of government.
Oh yeah, Basil Lakapenos is one of those people, and we will be hearing a lot more about him in the future, but let's just say that Basil Lakapenos, he is the illegitimate child of the Emperor Romanus I, and he ruled during the 920s to 940s, I believe, if memory serves. So, but he will be important later on.
To secure her position, the imperial widow searched for a suitable groom. And she soon found one in Nikephoros Phocas, a brilliant Anatolian general who had just finished the reconquest of the Muslim Emirate of Crete.
So, Nikephoros Phocas was a member of the illustrious Phocas family, and it was the Phocas family was part of the military aristocracy, and it is famous for, at this point, producing many high-ranking and often very successful generals. and many of them holding the title of Domesticus of the schools, and that is basically the title awarded to the commander-in-chief of the Roman armies at this point. For example, Nikephoros' grandfather had led the Roman reconquest of southern Italy during the reign of Basil I, who established the Macedonian dynasty that Basil II is a part of. And Nikephoros had made a name for himself, especially under the reign of Constantine VII. He was appointed to the Anatolic theme in 945, and he succeeded his father, Bardas Phokas, as Domesticus in 955. Now, from then on, he led several successful campaigns. He especially focused much of his attention on essentially beating down on the Hamdanid dynasty that governed Aleppo, the Emirate of Aleppo. And it was in terminal decline at this point, so Phokas, had some luck with that. But he continued to weaken Aleppo, and then in 961 he successfully reconquered Crete from the Arab Muslims that had established an emirate there back in 827. And so it was a really important reconquest. I must emphasize this because Crete has been used for a century, more than a century by this point, as a base for Arab piracy. It was really disrupting trade and commerce. So this was a really big deal to get Crete back, because it put an end to all that.
Now the senior emperor, after his marriage to Theophano, Nikephoros would go on to have a particularly successful reign.
Yeah, so in order to secure her position and her son's positions, because remember, they had been crowned co-emperors, so technically Basil and Constantine are the emperors right now, but they need a regent, and a Empress Dowager is simply not going to cut it. She would not have the influence to defend herself against the scheming generals and courtiers. So she invites Nikephoros to claim the imperial purple, and it was a very smart move because Nikephoros is at this point the most influential, most successful general in the empire. And while the marriage was strategically beneficial for everyone involved, it seems that the marriage truly was quite political. Theophano and Nikephoros seems to have a loveless relationship, and Theophano actually took a secret lover named John Zimisces, who was perhaps the second most successful general at this time. And John Zimisces is going to be important later on, so, remember him.
At first, however, the emperor failed to prevent the Fatimid conquests of the final Byzantine outposts on Sicily.
Yeah, so the Muslim conquest of Sicily has been ongoing for as long as actually happened the same year as Crete was conquered in 827. But the conquest of Sicily took quite a bit longer to accomplish in full. And Nikephoros tried to save the last Roman outpost on Sicily, but was unable to do so, especially after the Roman navy was defeated at the Battle of the Straits in 965. So unfortunate, but that's just how it goes.
And led an inconclusive war in southern Italy against Holy Roman Emperor Otto I.
Now you might be thinking, why are the Romans fighting the Holy Romans? Well, if I bring up the Holy Roman Empire, one must always bring up Voltaire's old adage that the Holy Roman Empire, say it with me, was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And this was actually important for this particular conflict. What's happening here is that the Romans and the Holy Romans, if you want to call them that, the Germans, I'm going to call them the Germans, that's what they really are. They were having a fight. They had contested territory here in southern Italy, and there was also a conflict over the imperial title, because of course the Eastern Romans never recognized the title of Emperor of the Romans, which had been granted to Charlemagne back in 800. So, you know, it was a beef about imperial legitimacy, but it was primarily a territorial dispute in southern Italy. And like they said, it was a rather inconclusive campaign in the end.
These minor setbacks would be soon forgotten after Nicephorus's victories against the Syrian Hamdanid dynasty and the recovery of the crucial region of Cilicia after a series of successful campaigns.
Yeah, this is basically Nicephorus completing what he'd already been doing before the reconquest of Crete and before he became emperor. And he finally recovered Cilicia, which was a huge deal, by the way, because it allowed not only more tax income and more resources to the Roman state, of course, but now they had a springboard from which to launch attacks further into the Emirate of Aleppo, and perhaps to retake Antioch itself, which was once the second city of the empire.
It was around 966, in the aftermath of these gains, that Bulgarian envoys arrived in Constantinople. Since 927, the Bulgarian Empire had been ruled by Tsar Peter, who ushered in a 4-decade-long peace between his state and Byzantium. As part of this peace, the Romans were obliged to pay an annual tribute to the Bulgarians, who in return would prevent Hungarian and other nomadic tribes from using Bulgaria as a staging ground to raid Byzantine territory.
Yeah, so Peter I of Bulgaria is the son of Simeon the Great. And historically speaking, he's been seen as a sort of weak ruler, but now historians have sort of reevaluated him. He consolidated, he stabilized, he had peaceful relations with the Romans. I know, can you really fault someone for that? I think that's a good thing if you don't fight too many wars. But yeah, Nicephorus and Peter I is not going to get along here. And this really sets the stage for Basil later down the line.
However, exhausted by decades of dry weather and the demanding campaigns of Peter's predecessor, Bulgaria failed to uphold this promise. Additionally, Peter may have condoned the raids in retaliation for Byzantine support for Serbia in their ongoing conflict with Bulgaria. Therefore, when Peter's envoys arrived at Constantinople in 966, Emperor Nicephorus had them beaten and sent back empty-handed to the Bulgarian capital of Preslav. Confident after his success in the east, the Roman emperor began to shift his attention back to the Balkans. However, instead of dirtying his own hands, Nicephorus sent envoys and lavish gifts to Kiev, the capital of the Rus.
So now the Rus are coming into the picture. Now, at this point, the Kievan Rus is still a fairly young state. It was only really established in the late 9th century by Oleg the Wise, as he's called. Over the time, the Kievan Rus established pretty strong ties with the Eastern Roman empires, mainly through commerce, but also religion, as we will see later on. But they also established quite deep military and marriage alliances. So, over time, the Rus became more and more integrated into the Roman sphere of influence, and the relationship on a whole evolved towards one of greater cooperation and mutual benefit. That's not to say there weren't many strained moments along the way, if you can call it that. But still, it was quite a mutually beneficial partnership in the end. And of course, if you don't know, the Kievan Rus is the ancestor state to Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, and they all claim the Kievan Rus as its cultural and ethnic origin, and it's quite an important state, which still haven't reached its zenith at this point.
Having just destroyed the Khazar Khaganate, the Prince of Kiev, Svetoslav, responded enthusiastically to this proposal of a combined invasion of Bulgaria. In 968, he landed near the Danube Delta with an army of around 60,000 men.
Now, in medieval context, 60,000 men is an absolutely insane number. And most kings of Europe would be happy if they could raise 10,000 men, let alone 60,000. And the only one really able to match these sort of numbers would be the Eastern Roman Empire or the Fatimid caliphs. They could raise similar numbers. But still, this was an absolutely huge army. I cannot stress that enough. And Nicephorus might have purchased more than he bargained for.
In mere months, the Kievan prince annihilated all Bulgarian forces he came into contact with and captured as many as 80 fortresses in the east of the country. Nicephorus was alarmed by the speed with which the Rus defeated Bulgaria.
Yeah, he just wanted Bulgaria weakened. He doesn't need another Slavic superstate being established on his doorstep. So he realized that this move backfired horribly, and now he has to turn to the Bulgarians for help, which is quite ironic.
And began to doubt the intentions of Svetoslav. That same year, he negotiated a separate peace with Tsar Peter, who sent his young sons Boris and Roman to Constantinople as negotiators and honorary hostages. Soon after, the Byzantine Emperor bribed the nomadic Pechenegs to attack Kiev. This was initially successful, as the Rus prince was forced to return to his capital to lift the siege.
And this is a practice that became quite more common as Rome's history went on. It would be very strange for Rome to do this during the Republic or the early mid-Empire, but at this point in history, the Romans like to rely on diplomacy more than anything else, if they can. And so bribing people to attack your enemy is quite common. So, here we have Nicephorus paying Svetoslav to invade Bulgaria. Then you realize he's gone too far. Now we need to bribe the Pechenegs to attack him in the back. And it's really quite funny how they use their immense wealth for these purposes. But if it works, it works.
However, much to the displeasure of both Bulgarians and Romans, Svetoslav returned the following summer, intending to subdue all eastern Bulgaria. At this critical junction, Tsar Peter died from a stroke and was succeeded by his son Boris II, who had just returned from Constantinople. These were tumultuous times in Byzantium as well. In December 969, Nicephorus was murdered in his sleep as part of a conspiracy organized by Empress Tiaphano.
Yeah, so Nicephorus sort of dug his own grave here, but of course this sort of assassination wasn't uncommon. But really what happened here was that this whole conspiracy started when Nicephorus demoted a man named Michael Bortsis. I believe he will show up later in the series. And what had happened was that during the Syrian campaigns, or the campaigns against the Hamdanid in Aleppo, he had left Bortsis in charge of the siege of Antioch, but he had explicit instructions not to try to take the city while Nicephorus was absent dealing with the whole Bulgarian Rus situation, if you want to call it that. But Bortsis had an opportunity to take Antioch, and he successfully managed to do it, actually. But rather than being rewarded for this act, he was punished. He was demoted from his position as strategos, I believe. And he was really miffed about this, so he began to seek out allies, to plot against Nikephoros. And he quickly finds an ally in Theophano and John Zimisces. Now, what had happened was that John Zimisces also had a grudge. Apparently, he had been appointed Domesticus of the East, but he had been demoted from that position because Nikephoros thought he was plotting something or he was being disloyal. But whatever the truth of the matter was, John Zimisces was also quite displeased with Nikephoros. And of course, Zimisces was the secret lover of Theophano, and you can see where all this is going. So basically, Theophano arranges it so that Zimisces and his party can assassinate the emperor. And so it was. And then John Zimisces would come to power.
And the emperor's nephew, John Zimisces, who then assumed the throne.
And it's quite funny, the first act John Zimisces does after assassinating Nikephoros is to exile Empress Theophano to a convent. And in order to secure his legitimacy, he instead marries the daughter of Constantine VII. And so it goes. Be careful who you plot with.
The new emperor had no intentions of sending aid to Bulgaria in their renewed conflict with the Rus. Furthermore, John's ascension immediately sparked a revolt in Caesarea, led by another nephew of Nikephoros, a man named Bardas Phocas.
Yeah, so John Zimisces, Bardas Phocas, both of these were ambitious men who both aspired to claim the imperial purple. And when Nikephoros dies, there's a vacancy, of course. John Zimisces was, of course, the first to fill the vacancy. That doesn't mean other people were going to accept it lying down.
Realizing his desperate situation, the new Bulgarian Tsar Boris successfully allied himself to his former enemy, Svetoslav. In 970, a massive Russo-Bulgarian force crossed the Balkan Mountains, conquered Philippopolis, and headed towards Constantinople. In the meantime, John Zimisces had sent his trusted general of the East, Bardas Skleros, to deal with the rebellion of Bardas Phocas. After swiftly putting down the revolt in Anatolia, Skleros was sent to Thrace to intercept the Russo-Bulgarian army. By March 970, the Slavic force had reached the town of Arcadiopolis, where they were met and annihilated by Bardas Skleros.
Yeah, so Skleros managed to fend off this joint Bulgarian-Rus force at the Battle of Arcadiopolis. Numbers vary wildly, as they always do in the sources of ancient times, but it is clear that Skleros was heavily outnumbered. And according to the sources, what he was able to do was to set an ambush in advance, and when battle was joined, he managed to spring the ambush and defeated this force with minimal losses. And so quite an impressive showing by Bardas Skleros, who was also a very successful general, I might add. You notice we have many of these successful generals during this time, and that's not something the Eastern Romans always had the fortune of. Of course, this also means extra scheming and plotting, because, every successful general will want to claim the imperial title at some point.
Zimisces organized an expedition to expel the Rus from the Balkans the following year. In 971, the Byzantines crossed into Moesia, capturing the Bulgarian capital and the major fortress of Dorostolon, and finally forced Svetoslav and his army to leave for good. Following this victory, John transformed the former Bulgarian heartland of Moesia into a Byzantine province, capturing Tsar Boris and proclaiming the country annexed. Yet resistance was beginning to mount in the western half of the once strong Bulgarian Empire. Preoccupied with his two famous invasions of Syria, Tzimiskes neglected to put any effort into
let's not blow past Tzimiskes' campaigns in Syria. They were actually quite impressive and quite successful. The first campaign recaptured significant territories, including the cities of Emesa, Damascus, Tiberias, Nazareth, so significant gains in both Syria and Palestine. And of course, Antioch was captured even before Tzimiskes took power. And the second campaign, he pushed even further south into the ailing Abbasid Caliphate. He took Beirut, Tyre, Tripoli, and even made an attempt at Jerusalem, though that didn't happen. But this further consolidated and enhanced the Roman power in the Eastern Mediterranean. And these are territories that the Romans had been expelled from for more than 200 years at this point. So this was quite an accomplishment by John Tzimiskes. But of course, this took significant resources and the emperor's personal attention. And so he left the Bulgarian threat to bubble, and they would be back to bite him.
Securing the still independent western half of Bulgaria. 4 relatives of Tsar Boris, the brothers David, Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, organized local resistance. From 976 onwards, with their base at Sredets, the brothers would launch raids and capture many Byzantine forts in Greece and Macedonia. However, the 2 elder brothers, David and Moses, died as soon as 977. Moses was struck by a stone while he besieged Ceres, whilst David was murdered by hired thugs. In the meantime,
being a man of high stature and position in ancient times did not mean job security, that's for sure.
John Tzimiskes passed away in 976 on his return journey from a victorious campaign in Syria.
It is said it was Basil Lakapenos who actually poisoned Tzimiskes. There's no real evidence for that, of course, but the story goes that Tzimiskes was planning to confiscate and rein in the huge landed aristocracy, and Basil Lakapenos was one of those who had acquired huge estates. And so apparently, to prevent this, he had Tzimiskes poisoned. As I said, there's not any real evidence of this, but, it's not out of the bounds of possibility. More likely, he just, died for some reason. He took ill, apparently. We don't know what disease, but so it goes.
Finally, the firstborn son of the old Emperor Romanus, Basil II, who was now of age, could rule as senior emperor. However, for the first 10 years of his reign, much of the decision-making fell to Basil's eunuch uncle, Basil Lakapenos.
Yes, so now we're back to Basil Lakapenos again. And the story of Basil Lakapenos is that since the reign, like I said before, he was an illegitimate son of the Emperor Romanus I Lakapenos, thereby the name. But he had held various official positions within the Roman state under numerous emperors, beginning with his father, Romanus I. And during service to all these subsequent emperors, he had risen through the ranks. He became Grand Chamberlain, President of the Roman Senate, and during this time he amassed quite a bit of influence, especially, and huge personal wealth, and like I said, massive estates along the way. And he had hoped that Basil II and Constantine VIII would be mere puppet emperors controlled by him. Now, if Constantine VIII was the only one around, let's say Basil is out of the picture for some reason, Basil Lakapenos would probably be successful, because Constantine VIII had no interest in anything to do with the matters of state. Diplomacy, administration, military affairs, he had no interest in any of that. So, unfortunately for Basil Lakapenos though, Basil II was there, and he was very much not like his brother. He was a military man, he was a studied man, he learned the administration of the empire well, and he bided his time until he was strong enough to seize power from his relative here in this case.
Their hold on power was immediately challenged as the victor of Arcadiopolis, General Bardas Skleros, was proclaimed emperor by his forces in Anatolia. To counter the rebellion, Lakapenos recalled Bardas Phokas from exile, who had previously been defeated by Skleros during his revolt against Emperor Tsimiskis. After losing the first two engagements against Skleros, Bardas Phokas finally defeated the pretender in 979, forcing him to seek refuge in Baghdad. In the meantime, the remaining leaders of the Bulgarian resistance, Aaron and Samuel, managed to expand their control in Greece and Macedonia. In 983, Samuel captured Larissa, the main city of Thessaly, and one of the most strategically important Byzantine strongholds in the Balkans. The Romans reacted sluggishly as tensions between the young emperor, his eunuch co-ruler, and the victorious Bardas Phokas reached boiling point. After accusing him of conspiring with Phokas, Basil II removed his uncle from power in 985. Now, finally, the sole ruler in Constantinople, the young and ambitious emperor knew that he had to prove himself as a capable commander if he was to maintain his position.
Yeah, so for many a Roman emperor, the real test of one's legitimacy is not bloodlines, but it is how accomplished you can be on the battlefield. And Basil, despite being quite young and inexperienced, still needs to take on this challenge, because he is being challenged by much more powerful senior figures within the Roman state. And so he has to make a statement, if you will, by leading a successful military campaign. And yeah, that's what he's going to try to do here.
And so, Basil assembled an army of 25,000 and prepared for an invasion of western Bulgaria, planning to strike straight at the heart of the country by capturing the new capital of Sredets.
So in this campaign, Basil was looking for one decisive engagement, really, and was hoping to, do a knockout punch on the Bulgarians here by taking the new capital. We'll see how that goes.
Before beginning the siege, the Byzantine emperor sought to divide his opposition through diplomacy and guile. Basil offered Aaron, who then controlled Sredets, his sister's hand in marriage. Realizing that the support of the Roman emperor could help him gain control over Bulgaria and depose his ambitious brother Samuel, Aaron accepted Basil's offer.
And this had long been a goal of many Bulgarian rulers and emperors. Was they really wanted the Eastern Roman Empire to legitimize them, whether that was by acknowledging in treaties that they held the title of Caesar, as I talked with earlier about Simeon the Great, or through marriage. Marriage was also a great way of securing legitimacy. And if Aaron here can marry a Byzantine princess, well, then he has the backing of Rome. Not really, but you know what I mean. He gains a sort of prestige and legitimacy that none of his competitors could ever hope to match. And through that, he would be able to secure his position as Bulgarian ruler.
Yet, instead of sending his actual sister, Anna, Basil sent the wife of an official disguised as the Byzantine princess. Eventually, Aaron uncovered the truth and, in an outburst of fury, burnt alive the Byzantine bishop accompanying the woman.
I'm not saying you should burn people for being, you know, how should I say it, dishonest about their intentions, but, you know, I get it. He was scammed.
It is worth noting that the occurrence of this incident is contested, with some sources instead suggesting that it was the elder Basil, Lycopenus, who instigated the plot in 976, after which Samuel had Aaron and most of his family executed. In any case, conflict was now inevitable, and Basil's army began its march towards Sredets early in the summer of 986. By July, Basil neared the border where he captured the fortress of Stenos, which guarded a narrow mountain pass known as Trajan's Gates.
Trajan's Gates, of course, named after the greatest emperor, Trajan, who brought the empire to its greatest territorial extent ever. And you know, it's the old saying, may he be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan. And yeah, just a little interesting tidbit.
This fortress was a crucial checkpoint that connected Sredets to Philippopolis. By the end of the month, the Byzantines reached Sredets and constructed a fortified camp. Located in the town, Aaron and his garrison had no intention to surrender. The Bulgarians had evacuated all livestock from the region and employed scorched earth tactics to try and starve the Byzantines into a withdrawal. Furthermore, Bulgarian garrisons stationed at the local Boyana and Urvic strongholds began to intercept and destroy Byzantine reconnaissance parties. The siege dragged on for 20 days. In the evenings, the defenders would sally forth from Sredets and harass the Byzantine forces close to their camp. In one instance, the Bulgarians successfully burned down most of the Roman siege equipment. Hungry, tired.
Yeah, this really shows the inexperience of not only Basil, but many of his generals that accompany him on campaign. The best generals and troops were located in the east, so you could really see the inexperience here, because clearly you'd set your siege weapons further away so that this sort of thing can happen. You know, you aren't supposed to be able to just sally out and burn the siege equipment, but so it is.
And running out of supplies, Basil began considering a withdrawal to Philippopolis. This course of action became even more appealing when news of an approaching relief force led by Samuel reached the Byzantine camp. However, before Basil could even begin the retreat, the Byzantine garrison stationed at Trajan's Gates abandoned their positions and returned to Philippopolis, leaving the main force in grave danger. Samuel quickly learned of this and took position around the northern, western, and southern mountain slopes around the pass. News of a Bulgarian ambush began spreading panic among the Byzantine army. To make matters worse, Basil's officers had convinced the emperor that Leo Melisinos, the commander of the garrison that had pulled back to Philippopolis, was heading for Constantinople to claim the throne. This forced Basil to order...
You know what, that's not actually a very unlikely scenario. Such a thing. There is precedent for such a thing in Roman history.
A quick march, leading to a disorganized and poorly planned retreat. By August 16, the Byzantine army entered the narrow pass, where Samuel's men had taken position. Stretched into a long column, Basil's army was comprised of a cavalry vanguard and the infantry located in the rear, while the emperor, guarded by an elite unit of Armenian footmen, was situated in the center of the column. Basil decided to spend the night within the pass, much like the Byzantine army that suffered a crushing defeat near Varbitsa in 811. which we covered in a previous video.
We might get to that video someday.
Repeating the failures of the past would prove to be a massive error. Samuel had already positioned his 10,000-strong army on the mountain slopes and surrounded the Romans on 3 sides. Just before dawn, he sounded the attack. The Byzantines were caught off guard, and their organization quickly began to melt away under the onslaught. Whilst Basil's elite guard put up a strong resistance, the regular Byzantine infantry in the rear suffered severe losses.
Yeah, and like I said before, this is not the troops of the east that Basil brought with him, because those troops are really battle-hardened and probably, while there's still an ambush and it would be a difficult situation to deal with, having experienced troops does matter, especially so in desperate times like these. And like he said, the Armenian footmen, the elite guard of Basil, was doing well. They put up a stiff resistance despite being surprised, and it's a testament to their experience. So yeah, you know, it's very unfortunate, and this is not the first time nor the last time a Roman army was completely ambushed and annihilated. Hannibal loved to do these things.
The Roman cavalry was still standing its ground. However, in time, its formation also began to disintegrate. Realizing that they and their emperor were in grave danger, Basil's Armenian infantry began pushing towards a small forested road. Stuck in the melee, the Armenians began aggressively cutting down everyone in their way, including their own allies, eventually making their way to the nearby passage. As Basil fled toward Philippopolis, the Byzantine infantry was massacred by Samuel's men. Whilst some of the cavalry successfully fled the battlefield, most suffered the same fate as the Byzantine foot, ending the engagement in a decisive Bulgarian victory. Basil had barely escaped death. The following year, he would have to deal with another revolt initiated by Bardas Phokas and a resurgent Bardas Skleros.
Yeah, the defeat at Trajan's gates really was it was really bad for Basil. The campaign was intended to cement and consolidate his hold on power, but now his position is weaker than ever, being challenged by senior and popular generals in the east. So Basil is in quite a precarious situation now, but Basil will prove himself in the future, and this was only the exception to the rule in Basil's illustrious military career.
Upon learning of his brother's attempted betrayal, Samuel ordered his execution. Now the sole ruler of Bulgaria, and with Basil weakened and busy on the domestic front, Samuel vastly expanded Bulgaria, reconquering Moesia together with the former capital of Preslav. Yet Emperor Basil II was a resilient ruler, and in time, the Macedonian emperor would prove that the battle at Trajan's gates had only delayed his designs. His 4-decade would see Byzantium reach its greatest territorial extent in 4 centuries, and his victories in future campaigns would earn Basil II the nickname Bulgar Slayer. If you stayed around this far...
Alright, that was part 1 of Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer by HistoryMarche. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did. I hope you enjoyed the added context, and if I was wrong about anything, or if you would like to add something else, please leave it in the comments. We can have a discussion about history, which is always fun to have. Unless you're dealing with people who are saying that the Eastern Roman Empire is in fact not a successor state to Rome, and if you're one of those, I don't want you here. No, but really, feel free to comment and of course like, and if you haven't subscribed, you may do so also. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time.